Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you all can hear me. We're just going to wait one more minute for a few more attendees to show up. We had a few more registrants than are appearing on the call right now. So if you could just bear with us for one more minute, we will get started. Landon, are you there?
I am here. Hi,
Wonderful.
Anna. How are you?
Hi, very well, thanks. How are you doing?
Doing well. Great to talk with you again.
Absolutely. Okay, so it looks like we've gotten a few more attendees, so we'll get started. Welcome, everybody, and thank you all for attending this conversation on building a successful RIA. My name is Anna Shea. I'm the president of AES Virtual Consulting. We do marketing exclusively for financial advisors, and I'm here with the president and founder of Revisor, Landon Jones. Hi, Landon.
Hello, Anna.
Hello again.
Hello, everyone.
So the way that we're going to be structuring this webinar is really more like a conversation with Landon. We're going to get to the nitty-gritty of the most important things to consider when making the decision to break away from your existing firm. I mean, that's a big deal, right? So there's going to be plenty of time after the webinar for a question and answer session. So, we really encourage you to take notes and come up with questions that you might have for us. The way that we will do the Q&A at the end is that we will ask people to send a chat message with a couple of words identifying their question topic. When we receive it, we're going to ask that person to unmute themselves by pressing *6. And then once you've asked the question and Landon or I begin to speak again, just remute yourselves so that we don't have any audio issues or feedback problems. I'll go over this once more at the end of the presentation before the Q&A, so I think we can just get started. Landon, the first question that I have for you is, where should someone start when they're considering making the switch from their existing model to forming their own RIA? I mean, are there valid reasons and non-valid reasons to make this type of decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk to a lot of folks, a lot of advisors about this topic, obviously. So I hear a lot of different things. I would break it down into there's three common areas that come up in conversations. One of them is the structure of their current firm, or more often changes to the structure, which prompts an individual or a group of advisors to consider leaving the firm. The desire to be independent, just having the independence and ownership of their practice, the ability to sell their practice when they retire or just decide to move on to something different, obviously, is a very common reason as well. And then compensation comes up a lot. Compensation, obviously, in regards to the percentage net revenue compared to the gross deal or concession that is produced by the advisor or the group of advisors. So those are the three most common things that we hear. Some valid, some not valid, I guess. I would say the change in structure at the firm is the most common thing that we see. So I think of my past experience as an advisor when I was with Lincoln Financial Advisors, and there was some major changes to the structure, the payout grid, and just how the way everything was handled in their offices across the country. And there was a lot of movement after that. So there were a lot of groups of advisors in different offices that broke away at that point. And a lot of it was related to compensation, but it wasn't just compensation. It was the change in structure overall for the firm that now those advisors they didn't feel like their desire or their objectives with working with clients could be handled anymore at their current spot. So they made a move and formed groups, and some started their own RIA, and others just went with a broker-dealer like an LPL or a Securities America or whomever that have their own. They have their own corporate RIA as part of that deal. The issue of desiring independence or being your own boss or the ownership of the practice is another really common reason that I see in this space, and it's another valid reason.
Yeah.
I think that just the mindset of being able to have your firm, have your name on the door, be able to make decisions as you see fit, make staffing decisions as you see fit, and have the proper technology that meets the needs of your practice, and be able to match all that with the cost of all of those things. It puts you in a position where you have more control compared to being at a firm like a Merrill Lynch or whomever, where a lot of those decisions are made for you, and then changes get made by the firm, and sometimes those changes aren't desired.
Now, let me ask you a question. Are there? I mean, those are some of the benefits of being independent, but are there some disadvantages?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the major disadvantage, in my opinion, is that although the current firm that the advisor could be with there's something in place that has prompted that advisor to look for something different. So there's something about the structure or the things that we just discussed that has caused them to be unhappy, I guess you would say. But that firm has scale. They have systems set up. They've made decisions on what technology is available to the advisors and how things are going to work. Now, the advisors typically don't have a lot of say into those decisions, but it's in place. There's an operational structure, if you will, in place.
Right.
So
if someone's planning to break out on their own, I mean, it's a big deal to make sure that you have that type of structure in place and are able to become scalable over time.
Yeah, yes, and it's not just a big deal to have it in place, but it's a big deal to get it in place. So, in other words, the process of having all the I's dotted and T's crossed, everything from technology integration to hiring the right staff, all of having the workflows built into your CRM so that you can have an efficient business running in the background. It's a very scalable model. It's a hard thing to put together. It takes a lot of time and energy to actually build that structure out.
Right. All right. So let's talk about money.
Yes. Let's talk about money.
Let's talk about
Okay, so this is the one. This is the interesting one, because this is the one that I hear this. This one comes up, fairly often, and it becomes kind of tough because what the advisor really needs to do in order to truly compare what their net revenue is going to be, or what their percent of their gross dealer concession is going to be if they break away, compared to what it is now if they're with a Merrill or a UBS or Morgan Stanley, whomever. It's a pretty big project to put all the data together for how you're compensated currently, and the fact that if you get a W-2, there's a 7.5% advantage for getting a W-2 as opposed to a 1099. So there's all those little details that come into play that make it really hard to just look at something on the surface and assume that you're going to have a higher net payout if you break away. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't happen, and there are there are obviously things that you can do in the structure of your firm and the efficiency of the back office and the technology integration and all those details to have a more profitable practice. But it's not a definite 100%. You're not definitely going to have a higher net revenue for moving out on your own. I would say, just to keep it generic, we're typically going to be keeping, all of us, in my opinion, with any firm, whether it be Edward Jones or you're on your own or whatever, somewhere between 40 and 60 cents on the dollar is going to be ours to keep, and the rest is going to go out in the form of expenses. So that being said, obviously we would rather be on the higher end of that, and that's definitely accomplishable in the independent space. But it's not, in my opinion, I wouldn't just make the assumption on the surface. I would definitely want to have a nice detailed project in order to get a feel for if we're actually going to be able to make more money after rolling out.
Right.
So it could be a very non-valid reason. A lot of times it is. A lot of times it's not a valid reason because their payout's not going to go up. But sometimes it is. Sometimes it truly will go up when they move out. It depends on the production level and what the firm's grid and payout structure looks like.
What would you say, I mean, in terms, if the only reason was I want to make more money and the other reasons really weren't coming into play, what would your suggestion be?
Well, the suggestion would just be let's do a detailed analysis of, and by the way, this normally would happen when the firm restructures something. You know, I'm going to use UBS as an example. I may have this wrong. It may have been somebody else, but there was an article I read, and essentially there was a target advisor of $1 million of GDC or up, and so what they did with their compensation grid was, you know, basically made it slightly less lucrative for advisors that were under that $1 million of GDC and slightly more lucrative for those that were above $1 million of GDC. So that structural change prompted would prompt some people to take a look at other options. So what I would want to do with that individual is say, well, let's look at the new structure. Let's look at the new grid, the new payout structure, and get all the details in line, and then compare that to what the average net compensation would be if you broke away and had your own firm. And there's some room for error there, obviously, because we're going to be making some assumptions about the independent structure. But we can peg that fairly close as long as we do a thorough job. So that would be the main thing is let's make sure we do a very, very thorough analysis of the current percentage net that we're keeping versus the assumed when we leave before we ever, pull the trigger and make this huge decision and then realize later that, oh wow, I'm not actually making any more money than I was at my previous firm. And that would be a lot of work to go through. If that's the only reason, that would be a pretty obviously disappointing thing to realize that you went through all of that work and didn't get rewarded for it.
Absolutely. So, you've really just touched on a pretty important part of the next step. Once somebody's made the decision, developing the structure of their new firm, what are the most important things to consider when beginning the process?
Well, there's a lot of budgeting issues. Just planning in general. I mean, if you really think about it, it's when if you hear advisors talking about the possibility of leaving a large firm and starting their own, not that I never hear it spoken this way, but the reality is you're starting a company. You're launching a company, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. We've got branding to consider, and everything from operations to leasing space, and all of there's a lot of items. If you were to write a checklist of items to get from A to Z, there would be several hundred items on that checklist. So there's a lot of stuff to do. As far as the structure of being a pure RIA versus one of the hybrid models, that's a pretty easy decision to make, in my opinion. Most of the folks on the call probably have a broker-dealer affiliation and probably need to keep a broker-dealer affiliation because they've got trail revenue and clients that they work with on a commissionable basis. So the pure RIA model, in my opinion, is a viable model to aspire to because of the fact that it's the most scalable, it's the most operationally efficient model. The hybrid model is a great model as well. It allows you to work with clients in a more robust way, in my opinion. You don't have some of the constraints that can come into play when you're a pure RIA. However, the hybrid model, when you have a broker-dealer affiliation, in addition to having your own RIA, there's some additional compliance concerns. So there are some definite additional complications on the compliance side. But operationally, from an operational efficiency standpoint, the pure RIA fee only is the verbiage we use in the space a lot. The fee only pure RIA model is definitely the most operationally efficient, but there are some constraints. So the reason why I say that's an easy decision most of the time is because if an advisor has half of their business is commission based that would go through a broker dealer and half is fee based that would now flow through their own RIA. they're most likely going to need to keep that that half of their block of business and continue to make revenue. The most important thing here, in my opinion, to cover, because this comes up a lot in my conversations, is a lot of advisors don't know that they can break away and affiliate with a broker-dealer, somebody like an LPL or a large independent broker-dealer, and have their own RIA. Not that some advisors don't know that, but a lot don't. They don't necessarily know what all their options are, and that's a really important piece, in my opinion. Just knowing that we do have that option. We've got that option to continue our business the way we have in the past, but now have much more control and have your name on the door and all those other things that can be attractive.
Right. And then, sort of speaking to doors, people can now operate within, the four walls of an office, or they can operate kind of virtually. What would you suggest to people considering this about making that type of decision?
Well, to me, again, outside of the most common reason, again, when you see these groups breaking away, it's typically some type of shakeup at the firm. Something happened, and a lot of advisors don't like what happened, so they look to move on, and from there is usually when the vision starts, or the dreaming starts about having their own place and owning their own practice and making decisions on their own and all of that stuff. But once that starts to, that type of mental process starts, there's a lot of things that come into play, positive things, when you don't have some of those constraints that you have at a large national firm. So, for example, I work with advisors that they do everything virtually. They have a marketing system, an online marketing system, and every bit of assets under management that they have is all done online. They don't have clients coming in locally to their office and sitting down and doing reviews. Not that they don't review things with their clients or do the same process in general, but they're able to do that without the geographical constraint, without having to go to an office, that's a half an hour from their house every day and sit down face to face. To some people that may not matter, but to others it does. And being able to essentially set up your model for, an advisor, depending on their age, might be doing this for the next 10, 20, 30, however many years, and the ability to make that, make those type of decisions and be able to build your practice. In this example, in a virtual capacity, that's one of many examples. But that's a really big advantage to be able to do that. And then you obviously have to have the proper team or the proper outsourcing partners in order to build that marketing plan that would allow you to do those types of things. Yep.
So we've talked a lot about concept. Somebody has validated their reason for becoming an independent RIA. They've established a conceptual structure of their new firm. What's next? How does someone start turning that idea into reality? And what do you think are the steps that are the most important things to consider? I mean, we're looking right here at, budgeting, outsourcing, compliance, and technology. Why do you see these four things as kind of the most important core things to really design?
Well, there are obviously more, but for the, we have a time constraint today, so obviously so
people like lunch.
These were the four that I thought we would benefit the most from talking about today, because obviously the goal is to get as much positive and helpful information to the folks on the call as possible. But what I would say before we cover those four, one really important piece here, in my opinion, is that all of this stuff. I mean, if somebody's hearing this for the first time, it can cause a lot of anxiety, especially if the person is strongly considering doing this. But the reality is that there are firms that literally exist to help people break away from a large firm. So there are consultants out there. There are multiple companies to choose from that will basically, from start to finish, help you get everything set up.
Mm-hmm.
So that is that to me is a very important thing to know, because going about it all on your own, unless your practice is really small. Like if somebody's brand new and has $5 million under management, that might be a different story. But a decent sized practice, let's say 20, 25 million and above, there's people to help get all of this stuff in line that have done it hundreds of times or thousands of times or a lot of times. So you're not on your own unless you want to be on your own. So that's a really important point in my opinion. And then moving on now to these different key areas of how you actually get there, whether you're doing everything yourself or having somebody help. Budgeting, outsourcing, compliance, and technology were the four that I thought for today's call with our time constraint would make the most sense. For budgeting, it's really simple. We've got to sit down and think through each and every item where we're going to have to come with money out of pocket to get started. So I talked to a guy in California last week, for example, that was in the process of leaving his firm. He had about $50 million of assets under management. But the point is that he was going to run his practice when he broke away out of his house for the first. His plan was for the first year or two, and the reason was he always visited his clients at their office. He's in California. He works with a lot of millennials. He mainly meets with them at his office or at their office. Mm-hmm. And the others, he usually met with them at home. So he had office space prior to breaking away, but it wasn't a client-facing space. So for him, running his new practice out of his home was a viable option just to save that outflow of cash for a year or two. And my point to that example is simply one breakaway, a group or an individual might need to lease space, and you've got obviously cost in regards to leasing that space. We're going to have to write a check for our E&O premium, one annual check for our E&O premium right off the bat as soon as we're ready to start practicing with our own RIA. We've got to get the RIA formed, and that obviously we can do our own ADV Part 1 if we want to. There's nothing that stops us from doing that, but most of us would probably benefit from paying a couple $1,000s to one of the compliance outsourcing firms that can do that for us, save us that it's a pretty big venture if you're not accustomed to doing them. So there's a lot that all of those items we want to take this advisor and make it specific to them and know, do we need $10,000, $2,000, or $50,000 in order to make this transition? And then also, are we going to have any a temporary loss in revenue? Because if I'm using Merrill Lynch as the example, if I'm at Merrill Lynch and I have to repaper all of my accounts, well, we also have things in place where we can make that happen faster by using another outsourcing firm. But there still could be a month or two loss in revenue for certain accounts that don't get moved into the new structure. So there's all of those things to consider, and we want to make sure that we have the capital needed to do that, whether that capital needed is $2,000 or $100,000. Right. So that's extremely important stuff. We don't want to get off the ground and be undercapitalized to get everything going for sure.
And earlier in the conversation we were talking about sustainability and scalability, and how it's taken years for many of the larger firms, and also, of course, yourself, to get through the strategic planning process and have workflows and, building portfolio models and handling all those things. And, how would you recommend somebody approach all of those things that are really the things that are going to help somebody not just get started from the get-go, but grow and become scalable and, really become a strong firm?
Yeah, this one to me is huge. And, right. And the reason I say that is because if you do things right when you're making this decision. So if somebody is breaking away, think about this conceptually. That person could break away and with use whatever number you want, 50 million of assets under management or 100, whatever that number is, you could theoretically break away and outsource all functions and have maybe one administrative assistant and no other employees. Okay, or on the opposite end, somebody with 100 million of AUM could break away, not know anything about the outsourcing space, and hire 4 or 5 employees. Right. So my point is that if the advisor doesn't have a well-rounded understanding of all of these different options and comparing outsourcing to doing everything in-house and some model in the middle, once you start a structure, it's kind of hard to transition. So if you were to choose the high number of employee structure and no outsourcing, it's most advisors don't want to walk in one day and say, hey, all 5 of you, I decided to outsource, so see you guys later.
Right.
Not that that's not possible, but that would not be ideal. So this to me is where somebody in that process, this is huge for them to, whether they get the knowledge on their own, which takes a lot of time, or they use one of the firms that's out there and available in the space to help with all of these items related to breaking away. But however they get the information, the long way or the short way, it's extremely important, because that's where you can start from the get-go with the structure that suits your practice or what you envision your practice to be in the future. And so that part of the planning process to me is so vital. Because you could design things very, very inefficiently from the get-go, and then it takes a lot of time and energy and sometimes money to unwind that, for lack of a better term, bad decision, or, however you would phrase that.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm looking at this chart we have up here. The time costs associated with all of these things is incredible. I mean, right now, essentially what this chart is showing is that if you attached a dollar amount to an advisor's time, and this is for a firm with $50 million of AUM, the amount of time that it would take an advisor in terms of dollar amount, it actually would almost pretty much bankrupt the company. So, this kind of shows that advisors really can't afford to do everything on their own. Well, I mean, at least not well enough to grow, right?
Yeah, that would be this concept in general is kind of complicated. For the sake of the time we have for today's call, to keep it short, if there was a team with $1 billion of AUM that was leaving UBS, okay, they're going to have more flexibility if they decided that they wanted to not outsource anything. It would be it would be a, not necessarily the best decision in my opinion, but it would be a viable decision at that size. You could have a full-time compliance person instead of outsourcing compliance.
Right.
You could have a full-time marketing person instead of outsourcing marketing. But when you're somebody that's got 50 million, 25 million, 100 million of AUM as an individual, and obviously multiply that out if this is a group, it might not be feasible at all to have a full-time operations person or marketing person or compliance person or fill in the blank. So the outsourcing piece becomes huge in this, especially with this size of a firm, because there's really there's not another option that's efficient. One of those options, as you mentioned, Anna, the advisor themselves spending all of their time working on these functions and getting all this stuff put together. That's the most common thing we see, by the way, is the advisor getting bogged down with so much of the stuff that goes on that's not client-facing, that they go on like this for years. I talk to people and work with people that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, and their practice has never grown to the level at which it, in my opinion, should, and it's usually attributable to one thing. They get inundated with all of the stuff that's not client-facing. They've got enough revenue coming in that they can pay their bills. They want to grow, but it's very, very hard for them to let go, continue to hire or outsource or whatever they need to do so that they have enough time to do the client-facing activities that are going to make their A clients, A and B clients, that they want to duplicate. They need time and energy,
right.
to create what they want, which is new clients being referred and growth. And so that issue of the advisor spending all of their time and energy and all this stuff, it causes, in my opinion, major problems, and it's the main reason for lack of growth in this space.
So then for you, I mean, your recommendation is really to choose either hiring employees, outsourcing, or probably a combination of both. And then, of course, make it sort of dependent on growth and setting goals and that sort of thing. So, what would you say are the upsides and the downsides to, hiring versus outsourcing? Say someone were going to choose one or the other.
Yeah, well, the obvious one is I'll use compliance as an example because this is the most, in my opinion, the most obvious one, the most extreme. If you look at the options out there, RIA in a box, Advisor Assist, whomever, let's say you somewhere around $2,000 a year for a smaller firm would, get you an outsourced compliance option where when you have questions and you need things, you can reach out to them. They handle your annual ADV update and all of those little details. So yeah, you can save that $2,000 and do that yourself. This is an example where there's not even a feasible option to hire a full-time compliance person if you have $50 million of AUM. To pay a $50, $60, $70, $80, $90,000 salary for a compliance professional at that size is really not feasible at all. So either the advisor has to be the micro level expert in compliance, or they have to pay a couple $1,000s to that micro level expert to outsource that function to. So in that with that example, that I don't even see there being a choice to hire.
Right, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Okay, so that's either you do it yourself, which in my opinion doesn't make a lot of sense because it's too much time involved in a non-client facing activity. But on some of the other areas, something like operations management or back office administration or the portfolio management side, that's one of those areas at this size where you could theoretically have somebody that trades and builds model portfolios. And I'm talking about investment management obviously now. At this size you could feasibly hire somebody, a full-time employee, to do all of that. Comparing that to the outsourcing option, it's usually more efficient because you've got an all-out expert in that space that's providing that service to you, and you don't have to deal with the hiring and possibly firing process and the training process like you would when you hire an employee in this role.
Right.
So a lot of times it comes down to, for a lot of folks, they don't want to be in an office by themselves and have only outsourced partners, and that's not necessarily the best way anyways. But you really need to be able to look at each option and compare the two and understand what goes into the hiring process or doing it yourself and having all that time devoted to a non-client facing activity and be able to compare that to the outsourcing option, which really is just being able to go out and get that information, which is not a hard thing to do, especially if you're working with a firm that helps in the breakaway process. All this becomes very simple. Right.
Well, this part was really interesting. I'm going to switch topics right now because I know that people are probably on their lunch breaks. So we're going to wrap up here in about, I think, the next 5 minutes and then open it up for questions. But I want to talk a little bit about compliance.
Okay.
I have clients who just are constantly biting their nails about compliance, and then some that don't seem to think it's that big of a deal. What are your recommendations for how an advisor can get everything that they need in order to launch their RIA and ensure that they're compliant from the get-go?
Obviously, if you're large enough, and it's even possible to hire a full-time compliance person as opposed to doing it yourself, or outsourcing the compliance function, one of those two things needs to be done, in my opinion. In my opinion, and from experience, if the advisor or advisors in a group model, they need to know compliance at a macro level. I mean, you've got to understand the basics of compliance, whether you have your own RIA or you're just, if you're at a branch office of UBS or Merrill Lynch, you still have to have a macro level understanding of compliance to keep yourself out of trouble. But the outsourcing that function or hiring a full-time compliance person, if you're large enough, is, in my opinion, by far the best, the decision to make, as opposed to trying to become a micro-level expert in the compliance space. There's too much stuff to know, and there's too much time that has to be devoted to knowing all these things. So I think the simple answer is that has to be delegated off, at least the side of it that requires the utmost expertise, and you as the advisor or the group of advisors just needs to know compliance at a macro level, and we've got to have just some very common sense type of procedures and strategies in place where if something new comes up and we want to do something, whatever it is, whether that be, hey, I want to create a Facebook page for our firm, or any type of social media setup or anything of that nature, we don't just do those things. We just have to have that light bulb go off that says, I need to ask my compliance officer that's hired locally, or reach out to my outsourced compliance firm to make sure that we dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's, so that we stay out of trouble in regards to regulatory agencies, the state or the SEC.
And compliance is fairly inexpensive to outsource, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is not. It's one of the most efficient from a cost standpoint, because there's not a huge amount of need. I mean, I think one of the main reasons advisors get anxiety about this is because they don't understand it well enough at the macro level. They don't. There's just some things they need to get up to speed on, and when the person doesn't know some of that stuff, I think it makes them feel like it's the fear of the unknown. They're always fearful of something they're doing that might not be proper from a compliance standpoint. So just some macro level understanding, big picture understanding of compliance, if it's not there already, will definitely help relieve the anxiety. And then just knowing that as you do stuff, whatever that stuff is from a marketing standpoint or whatever, that we got to make sure that light bulb's going off that reminds us we need to go make sure it's okay from a compliance standpoint first.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the final topic we're going to talk about is technology integrations. You are big into efficient technologies. I know that
I am. Yes.
Yeah. I know that you've spent years, honing your workflows and tightening up your integrations. And now this is, part of the back office solutions that Revisor offers to its partners. Tell us about your process, kind of the elevator speech, if you will, only because we only have a few more minutes, for building the technology integration that you use, and then maybe speak a little bit to the most affordable and the most efficient way of leveraging technology for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. The big picture issue here is, again, if you're going to embark on this project by yourself or with your team of advisors, if it's a group that's breaking away, it's a huge undertaking to evaluate. Let's say, for example, you want to evaluate CRM options. You look at Juncture, Salesforce, and Redtail, and then you flow over and look at financial planning software and take a look at MoneyGuide Pro, eMoney, so on and so forth. And so as you move along that channel, there is a lot of integration going on these days. So it has become easier and easier for data to flow back and forth between different software systems. But it's a very, very time-consuming project. And the reason why it can be a major problem if it's not set up properly from the get-go is because once you've established the use of a system, so let's say, for example, in my case, if we're using Redtail, eMoney, and InvestNet as the core software suite, If I start off in that capacity and didn't know some things that I should have known, and I decide, a year into the firm launch that I need to make a switch from eMoney to MoneyGuide Pro or from Redtail to Salesforce or whatever because of a problem that I can't solve with my current technology suite, it's a big deal to make a change. I mean, not that you don't do it when it's needed, but it's definitely much easier to make the proper decisions up front and get the proper suite built. Okay, so that's a for this call, for the conversation revolving around somebody making a transition from a large firm to starting their own, that upfront either hiring, working with a consulting firm that helps with the breakaway process, or somebody like a Joel Bruckenstein, for example, where you can pay him for a few hours of time to get the basics in order. That there needs to be some expert in this area involved in that process. Unless the advisor or the team of advisors themselves is going to undergo that huge learning curve to piece all of this together. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I think we're going to open it up to questions now. Thank you so much. This was great. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your expertise. So the way that we're going to answer the questions is, I'll have people type in just a couple of notes on what the question they want to ask and give their name, just because some people I can't see their name because they're on a phone. And so just type in your question and your name, and then I will unmute you on our end, and then you need to press *6. I'll let each questioner know when they're ready to unmute themselves. And I hope that was clear enough. So I actually have a question here from Jason Wagner. So Jason, if you want to press *6 and go ahead and ask your question, you can. Oh, it looks like Jason actually isn't attached to a microphone. Okay, so the question he asked is, based on your assumption of 50 million AUM, what do you use as the gross net profit anticipated? Assume an outsourced heavy formula.
Outsourced heavy formula. What I would be looking for with that size would be keeping 60 cents on the dollar. That would be the goal. So, in other words, we see a range, not that it never deviates from this, but 40% of gross to 60% of gross is our typical range. And there are things that can obviously cause, if you have a year where you go after a marketing strategy or something that's very costly, that can skew the numbers a little bit. But outside of some type of an outlier like that, that difference between 40 and 60 almost always is related to efficiencies, operational efficiency, which is involved with the technology integration and the efficiencies there, and it involves the choice for outsourcing versus hiring folks in house. So if you've got a highly outsourced model here, Jason, as you discussed, my goal would be I'm trying to keep 60 cents of every dollar. Now, as you go into different sizes, if somebody only has 5 to 10 million under management, for example, if they're brand new into the field and they happen to be going out on their own already, they might be able to keep 80 cents on the dollar because they're doing everything themselves, and they can with that small of a practice. They don't have outsourced partners or hired employees yet. So outside of those rare exceptions, getting up into the size, the 50 million example, that would be my goal. I would be looking for, I'd be wanting to keep 60 cents on the dollar, and I think you can, using the proper outsourcing options, really does create those efficiencies. So that would be my take.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a comment from Lonnie Wall from Aberdeen, Washington, and I need to apologize to Lonnie that apparently my voice quality, the mic quality keeps fading in and out. And I apologize for that. I'll have to fix it before our next conference
We're
call.
all appalled, Anna.
So
We're
Lonnie's
appalled.
really upset about it. He's sent us a couple of messages about it. So I will get on that, Lonnie. I promise. And our next question is from Catherine Woodman. She also isn't on a microphone. So
Okay.
she wrote, I hear that compliance is either a huge job or not a big deal at all. How much of a concern is compliance if it is outsourced? My broker-dealer has been insinuating that outsourcing is just not good enough.
Well, I definitely disagree with her broker-dealer because it's. I just went through an audit, my annual audit, and I just went through it about 2 weeks ago. The outsourced compliance company that we use, I get totally prepared for the audit every year. I have all my ducks in a row, and throughout the year, as things are needed, they provide those things. In other words, those things might be already known and scheduled. So an annual ADV update is required. So they automatically handle that. They reach out to us and ask us the questions that need to be answered in order for them to get our ADV updated accurately. And then there is the other side of the equation, which is just when we are reaching out to them. So I think back to my past experience. I'll use the Lincoln example. When I was with Lincoln Financial Advisors, they had an awesome compliance officer named Barbara. Won't say her last name, but she was a great lady. Really enjoyed her, and every single time I had something come up, a letter I wanted to send out, a marketing piece that I wanted to do, whatever it was, I always filtered it through Barbara. And that kept me out of trouble. I've never had any compliance issues. Well, when you outsource compliance, what you're really doing is exactly the same thing. When you need a compliance question answered, instead of walking down the hallway to your compliance officer that's there in the local branch, you're simply calling or emailing, reaching out in whatever medium you prefer to your outsourced compliance firm, and they are going to provide that same information to you that you need. So I definitely think outsourcing is a viable option, and I think that comment from the broker dealer is not an uncommon comment, but I disagree. I guess that's the easiest way to say it. I disagree. It is a big deal because, think about it, it's scary. I mean, when you think about compliance, people think about, I mess up and my license gets revoked or I get fined, or it's a scary thing. But just because it's a scary thing with some possible large negative consequences as possibilities, that doesn't mean that it can't be handled in an outsourcing capacity or that it's overly complex. Most of us know a lot more about compliance than we think we do. We know we can't say certain things to clients, and we can't email certain things to clients, and we can't give them information that hasn't been approved by our compliance department. Most of us know, if we've been in the business for more than 5 years, most of us know the things that can get us in trouble. We may not be able to write a book on compliance, but we know what those big picture things are, and we just need to be smart about reaching out and talking to the expert before doing something to get yourself in trouble. Long answer, I apologize, but I would say I've never had any issues myself, and the outsourcing function has worked great for me.
Great. Thank you. Well, I don't see any other questions. One thing we didn't cover was kind of the establishment of establishing those relationships with custodians. I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit to that, because it's so important and it's so helpful, especially when building or starting your own RIA, to have those relationships. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, and then I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah, that piece, actually, we didn't have a lot of time today, obviously. So I considered going into the common concerns, but this is really what we're flowing into, in my opinion, is the common concerns. And I'm thinking back to a conversation I had with a colleague of mine in the Cleveland area last year, and he spoke about this concern for about 10 minutes, but what it boiled down to was this. He's accustomed to having the big name like UBS or Morgan Stanley. And when the client comes in or when he gives client business card, whatever, happens for that initial meeting, he's got that big name behind him, and that makes him feel comfortable. It makes him feel like the clients are going to be comfortable and not, be worried about their money being absconded or anything of that nature. And so as he was describing this, and he was talking about independence and the fears of being independent, even though he would like to do it, I mentioned to him that most RIA owners custody with either Fidelity, Schwab, or TD Ameritrade. That those are the very common custodial partners. And he says, okay. And I said, well, that's a big deal, because if once you understand your role as the RIA, and then you understand the custodian's role as the safekeeper of those assets, it's an easy way to make your clients comfortable with your independent status and not viewing you as someone that's a member of a national firm that everybody knows the name. So I described to him how we would tell a prospective client that we're not employed by Charles Schwab or TD Ameritrade or Fidelity or whomever, but they are our custodian. They are the safekeeper of our clients' assets. You get statements from them. You can call them 24 hours a day, go online, so on and so forth. And that was a big surprise to him. And I don't know if that is to everybody, but it really is a very, very the custodian you pick is obviously very important, but the more important thing there in my mind for this conversation for folks considering breaking away is when that concern is there about not having the big national name behind you anymore because your firm name is going to be, Joe Smith Financial Group, for example. You're going to have a big name to use to make your clients comfortable, and just learning how to describe that or how to teach them that. And the same goes on the commission-based side. So most of the folks on the call probably are going to continue to have a broker-dealer affiliation. And the reality is that most of the broker-dealers that are hybrid-friendly, a majority of them clear through Fidelity. So the nice thing is that your clients on the commission-based side would have Fidelity as their custodian, and if on the RIA side, on the fee side, if you choose Fidelity or TD Ameritrade or Schwab or a combination of those, because you can have more than one custodian, you've got a big name on the fee-based side as well that can make the client comfortable with who's holding their money. So being able to conversate about who's holding and safekeeping your money versus us being the investment advisor that is trading the portfolio and doing whatever is needed to help you reach your goals. That's a huge piece, and that for some reason is missed a lot. Most of the advisors I talk to, they imagine their independent life being one in which they like the fact that their name is on the door and they've got something that they own, but they fear the assumed smallness, if that's a proper way to say it, the assumed size of their firm, and leveraging the large national custodial name as a partner of yours, or the large clearing firm on the commission-based side. It makes that conversation with the client very, very easy, and it's easy to make them comfortable with working with an independent firm, in my opinion, and in my experience.
Great.
Long answer again, Anna. I apologize.
No, I think it's really informative. So, all right, I think we can wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for attending. And if anybody needs more information on working with Revisor for breakaway consulting services or TAMP or back office solutions, his contact information is right here on this slide. And if you have a need for marketing strategy, website content development and design, branding, or any other types of marketing, you can feel free to contact me as well. And I want to thank you so much, Landon. I appreciate all your time, and the answers were great.
Absolutely, Anna. I always enjoy our conversations, and thank you to all the advisors that were on the call as well. Hopefully this was informative and helpful. That was the goal.
All righty. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.